Hello, everyone. Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Wednesday, July the 30th, 12:36, Rio de Janeiro time. Apologies for the few minutes late, like we actually started the live stream, but it looks like there was a glitch with our streaming software. If you could do me a favor, let me know if you can see me, if you can hear me okay. So I know that now we are actually live and getting started with our live stream. Okay. And as usual, if you are participating in our live stream, you have a priority to suggest a topic of your interest to be discussed here live. And while we're still waiting for our friends to warm up and suggest topics, let's talk about a new development, most probably an outcome of the ongoing disputes between Brazil and the United States. We are starting to see some, immigration officers applying fines to U.S. citizens who are in Brazil renewing their residencies. Okay, that is happening probably for the second or third time for clients who are renewing their digital nomad residencies, right? As you probably know by now, if you apply abroad, we call it a visa. But if you are applying while you're physically in Brazil, it's going to be a residency. And typically, whenever a client is going to renew the residency, right, there may be like a period of time in which their old digital nomad residency expired and they are waiting for the new one to kick in. But this is supported by an application, but an ongoing application with the Brazilian immigration. And typically, the Brazilian immigration is going to follow the framework from our 2017 immigration law that says that while an immigrant is in Brazil waiting for the outcome of an application, in theory, they are free to stay, to remain, to leave the country and come back, right? Now, an interpretation of this possibility is that, in theory, like they should not receive a fine. But now what we're seeing is that particularly US citizens are being fined even within the timeline of the application renewal, right? And that's very unfortunate. And our take, like our guess, right? Like, of course, this is not written anywhere, but our guess is that whenever there is wiggle room, particularly those Brazilian immigration officers who are aggravated by the ongoing disputes on tariffs between Brazil and the United States, they are choosing, to penalize U.S. citizens. Very unfortunately, all right. All right, we have a Bill. Bill is confirming everything good. Glad to know. Glad to see you over here, Bill. We have Ahmed. Welcome, Ahmed. Yes, sir. I can see and I can hear you. Thank you for letting me know. Denzil and Ronnie also confirming all good. Denzil from the UK, I guess, and Ronnie Dio. It has been a while. Good to see you, Ronnie. All right, so that was the news. Like there is still the whole expectation going on, right? Like President Trump said he was going to apply. He will apply a tariff, a broad tariff on Brazilian goods of 50%, starting on August the 1st, meaning a couple of days from today, and that's the expectation. Unfortunately, there is no real relationship between the two presidents, right? Like President Lula and President Trump. So there is a number of participants in this soap opera, if you will, trying to achieve some common ground. And of course, we hope that everything is resolved on time, but we're gonna see eventually. Okay. All right. Something else here. Just had a consultation today with a gentleman. He happened to buy a property under a friend's name, right? Like, I mean, it could not be a good idea. And the friend was supposed to record the property back on his name after he would have, like, proper documentation. And now the friend, is giving him radio silence, and the property is recorded on the friend's name, right? So, whenever, foreign citizens, they come to Brazil, particularly from the US, the UK, they are usually impressed by, like how friendly Brazilians are, and how accommodating the culture is. And many times, like people are going to suggest like those types of workarounds, like jeitinho brasileiro. That's how we say in Portuguese. But listen, if you're dealing with real estate, and real estate typically is going to involve a lot of money, I think there is no room for jeitinho. There is no room for workarounds. And our recommendation has been, since always, for you to do the right thing, right? Another consultation I had yesterday, and I couldn't believe it was a gentleman, like a retiree from the United States, and he was trying to buy a property in Florianopolis. As some of you may know, like in Florianopolis, many properties, they don't have like proper title, because Florianopolis is an island, and there are many areas in which you cannot, in theory, build. And guess what? People are still building stuff on those areas, and they don't get a title. And so this retiree was trying really hard to buy this property. And then I was trying to understand the specifics of the transaction. And then, to my surprise, on top of the fact that the property didn't have a title, there was other issues with the ownership, right? So the chain of ownership, there was a dispute between the prior buyer and the developer of the property. There was an ongoing assessment by the city, as far as I understood, against like the property, or whoever was holding the property, because it was built on an area that was not allowed for any constructions. And not surprisingly, when this gentleman sent money to Brazil, the Brazilian bank, Brazilian banks, whenever you're buying a property, whenever you're sending like a large chunk of money to Brazil, you need to explain why you send this money, right? Very easy for you to send a wire transfer from the United States for a couple of $100,000. You just go to Chase branch. Sometimes for some clients, they can even do from their, internet banking. And however, the money never arrives at the recipient. The money will always be caught by the Brazilian bank compliance department, that will run a thorough compliance process before releasing the funds into the recipient's account. Okay, so this gentleman, he sent like this bulk money, and not surprisingly, he was caught in the compliance. And when the compliance asked, all right, give me the title for the property, guess what? He said, well, the property doesn't have a title. And the bank said, well, unfortunately, we're not going to close. And the bank sent the money back to the United States, which unfortunately may take several weeks to occur. And to my surprise, this gentleman, the retiree, was still interested in buying. He said, at least, can you help me, bring this money in a different way? And I said, yes, there are different ways, but let me understand better the transaction. And once I saw, 3 or 4 red flags, I said, listen, if you find another property, even if the property doesn't have a title, we can potentially help you, as long as there are no other red flags. But like I also discussed with him about, how much was his income in the US, and how much he was buying the property for. And it didn't make sense from the perspective that he was risking like most of his savings in a single transaction, right? So just highlighting, and listen, I'm not like bad mouthing like, clients. I'm just bringing information. And by the way, I'm not giving enough information to identify those clients, so their privacy is intact, right? But I want to share with you, some examples of what you should not do in Brazil, if you will, right? So the whole purpose of this sharing is like to tell you not to do the same thing, right? So I think it was Warren Buffett who said, it's great to learn from your mistakes, but it's even better to learn from someone else's mistakes, right? So that's the idea behind this sharing, and I hope you enjoy this, this knowledge. All right, we have a dragon, Sex Dragon. How you doing, Sex? Good to see you again. I'm happy to have Oliveira Lawyers representing me for my digital nomad residency. I told you I would do it. That's so nice, Dragon. Really excited to hear that. I've been submitting everything, and I am on my way to São Paulo in 2 weeks. Tudo bem, Luciano? So glad to hear, Dragon. That's amazing news, right? Like I know we met before. It has been a while. I do remember, like the sharing. I do remember where you are based right now. Of course, I'm not going to share any particulars, but I remember you were, and I can tell you are still very excited about your Brazilian journey. So good to hear that you are on your way to Brazil, Dragon. So glad to hear. And once you are in São Paulo, I don't need to mention, you're gonna drop by. You're gonna drop by our office for some coffee. We are changing offices within the same building. We're moving to a much nicer office, and I think the office is gonna be ready next week. Like it has been like this, like for a couple of months. All right, it's going to be ready next week. And just like it is typical in Brazil, like this last piece of renovation is going to take, much longer than you expected. But yes, like once you drop by, Dragon, you're going to meet us in our new office. And I hope you're going to enjoy some Brazilian coffee with our team. Ronnie, are you finding problems with your retirement visa clients? I'm asking because Trump wants to make major changes to Social Security. He's saying funds will be reduced for future retirees. Ronnie, so you're probably talking about those issues that I was sharing about the Brazilian immigration. So what we think is going on, like the Brazilian immigration is becoming a pickier, right? Like traditionally, like as you know, the Brazilian culture is accommodating. So whenever there is a gray area, or whenever we see that the immigrant is doing a honest job in terms of meeting the requirements, even if there is something that is not quite there. Typically, the Brazilian immigration is going to give you a thumbs up, right? So what we see going on right now is that immigration officers, they are being tougher on their review, and for pretty much anything that is not like clearly compliant, they are asking for additional information, additional verification, and additional work, right? So that's what we see right now, Ronnie. On the retirement track, the main component, the main reason for you to qualify for the retirement visa, it's going to be your typical retirement income, right? So different countries have different assessments on the income. For instance, for Portugal, there is the D7 visa, which is actually called the passive income visa. Many people will call the D7 as the retirement visa for Portugal. But in reality, it is like a passive income, meaning that as long as you have the passive income, you are typically welcome to apply, right? But in Brazil, it's going to be all about like traditional, typical retirement income. So Portugal, okay for you to have, passive income. Brazil is going to be attached, is going to be requiring traditional retirement income. And the three main ones I can tell you are going to be Social Security, pension funds, and disability, right? So these are the three main types of traditional retirement income. And If there is a reduction, Ronnie, which is really interesting for you to share, let's say if it is a reduction in typical social security income occurs based on the Trump's decision for the social security, there is a potential Plan B, which is supported by the Brazilian law or the Brazilian regulation for the retirement visa. And this Plan B says something like this: listen, if your typical retirement income doesn't get to the minimum of 2,000, which is like the qualifying amount, they are going to let you use passive income, to help you meet the 2,000. But the bulk of the money should come from traditional retirement income. So in this example, let's say if before the reform, Ronnie, you were getting, let's say, 2,200, but after Trump's reform, you will start to get 1,800. So now you don't qualify anymore. What you could do, let's say, if you have a rental property generating 500, the Brazilian government would potentially accept your 1,800 in Social Security plus 500 coming from the rental property, right? So this is a potential approach for those of you who would qualify as of today, but no longer qualify after a potential reform to the Social Security under President Trump. All right, Ronnie, I hope that was helpful. Dragon, yeah, thanks for sharing. Absolutely, Dragon. We have Dr. Mustafa. Hi, I wish you a happy Wednesday. Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. Good to see you again. Is it possible to get a volunteer visa for 2 years and work as an English teacher online? A volunteer visa can lead me to PR. Can I volunteer for in Brazil? Dr. Mustafa, the volunteer visa is not really common in Brazil, but there are some clients for it. From a technical perspective, volunteering is going to be just like any other type of work. The only distinction is that you're not going to get a payment, but you're still going to need to secure. You're still going to need to secure a sponsor in Brazil, right? So it's not a matter of just saying, well, I'm gonna go and volunteer in Brazil, and therefore, I'm gonna apply for the visa. For the volunteer track, you do need a sponsor in Brazil, meaning typically a company that's going to say, listen, Dr. Mustafa is going to volunteer for us, and therefore here is all the paperwork and guarantees that we're going to support him if needed during his time in Brazil. All right, Dr. Mustafa, I don't recall if it is good for 1 or 2 years. Most of the applications, when you apply in Brazil, they're going to be good for 1 year. And then once you renew, they are going to renew for a longer periods of time. For instance, the retirement track, once you apply in Brazil, you get just 1 year. The second renewal is going to be good for 2 years. And after these 2 years, it's going to renew as a permanent residency. For the volunteer route, I doubt it would lead to PR, Dr. Mustafa, but I may be wrong. The volunteer track is not something that I keep in my head just because it's something rare, but it's an interesting question. Anyhow, Dr. Mustafa, Dragon, great quote from Warren Buffett. And yes, I've been working on this since January, been learning from you since February. I'll be happy to drop by the office soon. Looking forward to meeting the team. That's great, Dragon. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Mustafa, need tips on how to pass the citizenship test in Brazil, if you don't mind. Thanks in advance. Dr. Mustafa, so the test is actually about Brazilian language. I know the citizenship test, like particularly for the United States, it's very focused on like general U.S. culture and U.S. civics in general. The test for the Brazilian citizenship, it's all about the language. Of course, the language is going to be based on civic and cultural types of situations in Brazil, but the component is actually the language. And Dr. Mustafa, the idea, the tip or the hint that I typically share with our clients is that, listen, if you are living in Brazil, go out there, avoid, speaking in English, speaking Portuguese, and interact with others. So they are going to be your teachers, right? Like, I mean, nothing better for you to learn the language than actually using the language in a type of everyday environment. All right, Dr. Mustafa, that's the main tip that I would share. Like, you're gonna need to wait in Brazil for a certain amount of time, potentially 3 years, even if you end up, picking a fast route, such as the união estável or marriage. Altogether, it never, gets to less than 3 years in Brazil. Whenever you count all the time from arriving, to actually sitting for the exam. So during 3 years, again, as long as you are dealing with people on a daily basis, as long as you're going out there and interacting with people, that's, in my opinion, the best way for you to develop the language. Of course, you're also going to need to study grammar and writing. But in my opinion, writing and grammar is typically easier than it is for you to actually, speak and understand what other people are telling you. So there you go. That's my tip. All right, Hermon. Good day, everyone. Good to see you, Hermon. How will Trump's tariffs affect me now buying, owning, selling in Brazil as a non-citizen moving forward? Hermon, we don't know. We don't know yet. There are many threats by the President Lula administration in terms of how to retaliate. But there was a lot of aggravation at the beginning, of this whole situation. So once Trump announced the 50%, there was a lot of aggravation, many, threats by the Brazilian government. But right now, the approach from the Brazilian government, which kind of sounds wise to me, is like to wait to see if the tariffs are going to indeed materialize, and if they do materialize, and then see what's going to be done, right? Based on the latest updates from the Brazilian federal administration, the idea is not like to set new tariffs, because at the end of the day, if they set tariffs, guess what? Like, the ones paying the tariff are going to be the Brazilians and not the U.S. citizens, right? So the government, it looks like they're pretty settled on not implementing tariffs on our own, but they are going to do different things instead. For instance, they're the so-called, like the social media companies. As far as I understand, they don't typically pay taxes on the income that they are getting from Brazil. So there is a lot of, for instance, Facebook, right? Like, Facebook probably has billions of dollars in advertisement income from Brazil. And it looks like, most of this income is not taxed, because guess what? This is being paid in the United States, right? So what Brazil is probably or potentially will do is like should tax to establish some type of tax, because at the end of the day, like, if the eyeballs, right, like, seeing those ads are in Brazil, it's also, I think we can, agree that's also unfair to some degree, to have all the taxes paid to the United States alone instead of some level of taxes being paid in Brazil. So that's a strategy of President Lula's administration, to wait until the tariffs kick in, and then, to have like surgical actions done in order to respond to the 50% tariff. All right. But that's all we know by now. There may be, Herman, like other, outcomes. Like I said, just the dispute alone is causing immigration officers to become tougher on U.S. citizens. So we are seeing like fines being levied that would not be the case, like a month ago. And so we don't know about all the outcomes of the tariff dispute, but I promise that I will keep you guys updated. Ahmed, does Brazil offer scholarships for students based on their athletic abilities, similar to programs available in the United States? Yes, Ahmed, there are some scholarships, indeed. Probably not as well structured as they are in the United States. In the United States, you have a bunch of them. Like, there are even some websites with databases for scholarships in the United States. I would say they are much more scarce in Brazil than they are in the United States. But yes, there are scholarships based on performance by students. Okay, that's something that we also have in Brazil, Ahmed. Vanessa, hello, Luciano. Good to hear from you today. Good to see you, Vanessa. I wanted to ask if I can apply to the Nomad visa if I'm from Guatemala. I saw on a website the documents in Spanish are accepted, but not sure if this is correct. Vanessa, so if you are in Brazil, like if you are physically in Brazil, pretty much any nationality could apply for a digital nomad, right? Like even extreme ones like North Korea, Russian nationalities. There is no exception. Every single nationality, once you are in Brazil, you can apply for the digital nomad residency, right? Now, if you're talking about applying from abroad, meaning that you are applying for a digital nomad visa, the situation changes dramatically, right? The Brazilian government chooses not to offer the digital nomad visa to most countries. So actually, the digital nomad visa is an exception, right? And unfortunately, I don't know if they are offering the digital nomad visa in Guatemala. However, let's say if you are from Guatemala, but you are actually living in the United States as a permanent resident in the United States, I would say that you are welcome to apply for the digital nomad visa through a Brazilian consulate in the United States, right? So there are those distinctions. There are no restrictions by nationality, but there are restrictions based on the place where the consulate is sitting. And in my understanding, again, if you are from Guatemala, your passport is from Guatemala, but you are a PR, a permanent resident in the United States, you would most probably be free to apply to the Brazil digital nomad visa based on the standards applicable to other people, either of U.S. nationality or residing legally in the United States. All right, Vanessa. So that's more or less the rule. But again, if you are in Brazil, pretty much anyone could apply for the Brazil digital nomad residency. Of course, as long as this person would meet the requirements for such a residency. Ronnie, can you explain the benefit of the Utah online marriage? If this is done, does the U.S. citizen just take the marriage certificate to the Brazilian consulate in the U.S. to get the visa? Right, Ronnie. So, there is a distance or a distinction between the marriage and the visa, right? So I'm not sure if you're talking about the permanent residency, right? But maybe just to tell you, like the main advantage of the Utah route, right? The Utah online marriage is going to be an option for U.S. citizens who want to marry a Brazilian partner, but the Brazilian partner cannot travel to the United States. Very common, right? And not sure if this is going to be a surprise to you, but most Brazilians who apply for a U.S. visitor visa are going to have the application denied. Okay, I don't know what is the percentage, but if I had to guess, and I'm probably wrong, but my guess would be 80% denial and 20% approval rate. That's my guess. All right. I don't know if there are such official stats on that, but that would be my guess. Meaning that many US citizens, when they are in Brazil, they kind of fall in love with someone. They want to marry the Brazilian national, but the Brazilian national cannot travel to the United States to marry. So, being this the case, many US citizens, they try to marry in Brazil, and then they face the ferocious Brazilian bureaucracy and red tape, right? And some people, they are going to hire our office just to advise on the paperwork. And even with our support, it's still tough for the U.S. citizen to marry in Brazil because there is just like a laundry list of documents, and particularly if you had a prior divorce, sometimes the Brazilian cartório, the Brazilian registry, is going to even ask you for paperwork, like for the court records for your divorce and the settlement agreement, believe it or not. And all of those documents, they are going to need to be certified in the United States, receive an apostille, be sworn, translated in Brazil, and be recorded in an additional type of registry. So it's just like, something out of this world, right? Like for a divorcee to marry in Brazil. So when this is the case, many people are going to say, you know what, enough nonsense. I'm going to marry in Utah. In Utah, you can marry through a video conference, meaning that the US citizen would attend the video conference, the Brazilian would attend the video conference from Brazil, and a fully valid marriage would occur in Utah, and Utah would then issue the marriage certificate. And then you would take this marriage certificate, Ronnie, and then take to the Brazilian consulate in charge of Utah. I don't recall if it is the San Francisco one, but you would take like the divorce, the marriage certificate to the Brazilian consulate in charge of Utah, along with another laundry list of documents, but easier to obtain documents. And then they would give you what we call a transcript of the US marriage certificate, right? So you would have the marriage certificate from the US, the transcript that you're getting from the Brazilian consulate, and then you're going to bring those two papers to Brazil for an additional recording. And once this package is recorded in Brazil at a cartório, then you're going to get a Brazilian marriage certificate, right? It doesn't mean that you're marrying again. It just means that a Brazilian marriage certificate was issued based on the marriage that occurred in the United States. And the Brazilian marriage certificate is going to be the stepping stone, Ronnie, for you to secure your permanent residency in Brazil. All right. Now, there is the so-called family reunification visa offered through consulates in the US, but they are just good for 12 months. So typically, we just tell our clients, listen, forget about this thing. They're going to give you a hard time to give you something that's going to expire in 12 months down the line. So instead of wasting money and time with that, guess what? Just enter Brazil under the e-visa. And once you are in Brazil with the proper paperwork, we're going to help you apply for the real good one, which is the permanent residency based on a marriage. The technical name remains family reunification residency, not visa. But we call it like marriage-based permanent residency, right? Because it makes more sense. Whenever you talk about family unification, people don't know if you're talking about a consulate, about Brazil. So here at the firm, we call it marriage-based permanent residency. All right, Ronnie. I hope it helped. Again, this is just like like some main points about the journey and why people would pick Utah as a place for their marriage. Okay, Bill, Luciano. After I land in Rio, what would be my next step to get and spend money, or should I prepare in what way before arriving in Rio? Good question, Bill. So, if you have a major debit card, and we're talking here about Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, right? Like these major banks, like typically their debit card is gonna work. Is gonna work in Brazilian ATMs. Okay, the downside is that the rates are horrible. They are gonna keep a spread of around 15%, right? So that's pretty aggravating, I would say, to pay like 15% to exchange your money. But that's typically what people would do, right? Like, I mean, they would just get, they would just, land in Rio, go to a bank and they would draw like, probably 200 or 300 US dollars in Brazilian currency. Like you are unable to draw US dollars in a Brazilian bank, but I mean, you would draw the equivalent to 200 or 300 US dollars. You would just use this cash for small purchases. Okay, but very interesting to highlight, Bill. Like we have, it's a real revolution going on here in Brazil with a payment system called the PIX, which is somewhat similar to Zelle, Zelle in the United States, but I can tell you it is like, 1,000 years ahead of Zelle. Trust me or not, believe it or not, right? It is a Brazilian invention and it's like just a revolution. You can basically, do everything that you want to do without ever touching cash. And I had an experience like this. I actually spent probably a couple of weeks in Brazil without touching cash, and it was shocking to me because I think it was the first time. I usually keep some, change cash in my pockets, but like I was noticing. Listen, I haven't seen any cash for 2 weeks, right? So that's the new state of things in Brazil. People are, shining away from, cash and they just using Pix. Pix you use like on your cell phone. It does not matter how old your cell phone is. You would basically load a bank app on your phone to pay with Pix. Now, I probably know about what your next question is going to be. Well, can I get Pix? And unfortunately, if you're just arriving in Brazil without doing some homework up front, you're not going to be able to use the Pix. And then, yes, cash is going to be your best bet until you have a bank account in Brazil. For many of our clients, we assist them with a non-resident bank account. And one of the banks we work with here in Brazil, they would get you this non-resident bank account ahead of time, meaning before you arrive in Brazil. And you would potentially set up this bank on your cell phone, meaning that once you arrive in Brazil, you would have access to Pix and you would be able to stay like I stayed for a couple of weeks without even seeing cash, right? Which is pretty impressive because just like a few years ago, and by the way, the Pix was created under President Bolsonaro's administration, and it was just is just a revolution. Okay, there was an attempt by the current administration to start taxing the Pix, and it was almost like there was almost like a mutiny in Brazil, right? Like I mean, people, like the reaction on the possibility of taxing or creating a fee for you to use Pix. The reaction was so strong, but so strong that the federal government they had to immediately reverse course and say, listen, we're not gonna do anything to Pix at all. Because people, like they were getting berserk, right? Because Pix has been a game change for Brazil in so many different levels, Bill. But there you go, very interesting question of a practical nature, right? All right, Bill is complimenting. I have credit union with MasterCard. Not sure if that would work, Bill. A credit union, like sometimes they don't have the same features that a typical bank would, but I mean, you would be welcome to try. Um, I think that most of the cards I remember using, like from the US in Brazil, they were from a Visa flag. But I don't see a problem with a Mastercard. Let's say if you have a debit card with a Mastercard flag from Chase, I think it would work. You would probably work. Now, credit cards you could also potentially use to draw cash in Brazil, but my concern is that on top of the roughly 15% spread that you're going to be losing in the exchange, then there would be like an additional cost on the money because it would be a credit card. All right, Bill. So in your case, maybe it would be a smart idea to bring in, let's say, $500 in cash, and then at the airport you could potentially exchange your cash for Brazilian currency, so you could use like for small transactions. Okay, until you get pics on your cell phone. All right. All right. We have Vanessa. Yes, I'm in Brazil. I will book a call soon so we can discuss. Thank you, Luciano. Good for you, Vanessa. In Brazil, yes, we have a much better control of the process, and you are more than welcome to apply for the digital nomad. Ronnie, I understand after the online marriage, I would work with the Brazilian consulate in the US to gather other documents needed and then enter Brazil on the e-visa and then hire for process in Brazil. Yes, Ronnie, that would work and we would be pleased to assist you. Hermon, did you say PIX? Yes, PIX, Hermon. There you go. PIX, PIX. That's our version of Zell. And just like I told you, it is like 1,000 years ahead of Zell. It's just amazing. You can do everything you can possibly think of. And, that's a more like, kind of sad side of our country. But, most foreign citizens who've been to Brazil, they know that many times, like poor people, they are going to approach you to ask you for money, to buy food or something like this. So nowadays, if you tell a person that you don't have cash, you say, well, in the past, you would say, well, I don't have cash on me. And the person would, walk away, right? But nowadays, if you tell the person that you don't have cash, guess what they are going to tell you? Well, you can send me pics. All right. So that's how pics is ingrained in our daily lives as we speak. Bill, thank you for the super answer. You're welcome, Bill. And he's suggesting hit the like button. Yes, if you could do us a favor, hit the like button. That helps our business, and that's going to help this content to show up to other people just like you. Thank you very much, Bill. Thank you for the reminder. Christopher, Pix being 1,000 years ahead of Zell is too accurate. All right, Christopher. Thank you for the support. Yes, I'm very familiar with Zell, and Zell is more like a secondary. I mean, I meet many people from the US who don't know what Zell is, right? And like in Brazil, Pix is again is absolutely a blockbuster, right? So, yes, I mean, very different dimensions, but I don't know. Maybe one day, Pix at the inception it could be similar to Zell, but nowadays, Pix is just out of this world. Another advantage, or maybe its main advantage, believe it or not, Christopher and everyone else, you don't pay a fee. And that's why, like, I mean, many people or the government, or actually the governments, believe it or not, President Trump, not President Trump, but, within the tariffs discussion, the United States was accusing Brazil of using PIX, to hurt MasterCard and Visa. Because believe it or not, like you can pay anything using Pix and there is zero cost to it. At least from this perspective, it's going to be the very same thing as Zelle. But Zelle is kind of limited, right? Like you can go to Amazon and buy stuff using your Zelle, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. But here in Brazil, with Pix, I can go and buy a car I can go and buy a meal. I can go and pay, for my Uber driver. And guess how much I'm gonna pay for that transaction? 0%. And I'm sure you're very familiar with the Mastercard and Visa and American Express and diners, business model. You actually pay a substantial fee of, sometimes up to 3 or 4% of the amount. Meaning that if you're buying something for $100, $100, about $3 to $4 is gonna go to Mastercard, and this money is not gonna go to the seller, right? So obviously, like, you are paying that because the seller is building that cost into the price tag. But here in Brazil, I pay with Pix, and there is no 2 or 3% paid to anyone, right? So that's something that was actually articulated by the current U.S. administration as a reason to accuse Brazil of using a government means of payment to hurt competitors such as Mastercard and Visa. Right? Very interesting discussion, and very interesting that President Lula is under this ordeal with the tariffs, and there is a bad blood between President Lula and President Trump. Not surprisingly, right? Like, I mean, there is a very strong history of PT. PT is the party for President Lula in Brazil of antagonizing the United States, and recently, like, the President Lula was raising this flag. Let's finish up U.S. dollar as an international currency, right? And like, whenever President Lula would have a chance, he would take a jab at President Trump. So they don't have, even conditions to have a conversation. But on the PIX side, like, President Lula was saying, well, PIX is something Brazilian, like, nobody's going to touch PIX. And I like this position, right? Like, I mean, I think if the Brazilian government has created something so helpful for the population in general, right? It's weird for another country to come over and say, well, this thing is hurting my, credit card companies. But that's exactly what's going on, right? I mean, just sharing some thoughts over here. And of course, there are different perspectives to those things. All right, Vanessa, AirTM app offers Pix payments for non-residents. That's very interesting, Vanessa. I'm going to take a look into that. Now, let me guess, Vanessa, there is a fee involved. Correct me if I'm wrong, because nobody is going to offer Pix for free unless they are a bank. But if there is an option for an app, Vanessa, I think it's still worth the fee that you would eventually pay, just because it gives you access to so many things. And I'm taking note over here, AirTM, right? Of course, it's a play with ATM, right? So it's AirTM, very interesting. Thank you for this sharing, Vanessa. So interesting. Bill, thank you, Vanessa. Hermon. Also, I opened a Fendi a Rendimento Bank account. Sorry, Bill, it's available to non-residents even when outside the country. That's correct. That's one of the banks we work with. We work with several banks. Like, the banks we work formally on a recurring basis are Money Corp, which is like of UK origin, but is also based in the United States. Money Corp. We work with Topazio. Topazio is another very solid bank operating in the FX segment. We work with Braza Bank, BRAZA, and Rendimento. Right, these are our main partners for real estate transactions. By the way, like, we work formally with them. We work with the back office. And nice sharing, Vanessa. All right, so we are approaching the end of our live stream. If you have like a final topic for me to discuss, I'm gonna jump right into that. Next live stream is gonna be next month, right? It's gonna be on the. It's gonna be on the. Let me see. Third, 4, 5. It's on the 6th, right? If I'm not mistaken, it's gonna be on August. August the 6th. We're going to be meeting at the same time. And after this live stream on on August the 6th, we're going to get back to some live streams on Sunday as well. So if Wednesdays are not ideal for you, guess what? We're going to have some live streams on Sunday. I understand many people are working during this time of the week. That's why we have the live stream on Sunday, right? So for those of you who cannot participate in the Wednesday one, you have an alternative on Sunday. So that's it for today. I want to thank you all for your participation. Very interesting comments. Let's keep an eye at the dispute between Brazil and the United States on the tariffs. If you check, I'm going to write down here two major, portals that you can use to check on news. So one is going to be Estadão, and another one is going to be UOL, right? And then my tip is if you access with Chrome, you can machine translate with a single click. All right, meaning that you can, basically just, read all the news in English without paying anything, at least for the main articles, right? Like when you try to drill down when it's something more specific, typically the Brazilian newspapers, just like newspapers elsewhere, they are going to ask you for a subscription. But for you guys who are interested in Brazil, following the news is a nice way of, remaining in touch with the culture. So thank you again for your participation.